What is going on, y'all? I've got a quick little video for you today. I wanted to give some drafting tips. This is kind of more for beginner or intermediate drafters. If you're a highly experienced drafter, you already know all this, but thanks for watching. Wanted to give you a few tips on how to win more games when you're drafting. This also applies to sealed, like sealed tournaments and such, but limited in general. So tip number one I got for you is a little saying I like to say is card advantage is king. Card advantage wins games. And so the simplest thing is like drawing extra cards, right? That's card advantage. If my opponent draws one card per turn, but I'm drawing 2 cards per turn, as the game goes, as long as I don't get run over and killed, I am guaranteed to win that game. I mean, no matter how good their deck is, if they draw 1 card a turn and I draw 2 cards a turn, eventually I'm going to win. I'm going to draw more creatures, I'm going to draw more removal spells, I'm going to draw more lands and resources, and ultimately Magic is a game about resources. If I have more mana available and I have more cards in my hand, unless, that rare case where they just have an absolutely unbeatable bomb, I'm going to win that game. And so the tricky thing is card advantage in terms of just a spell that says like draw 2 cards. That's not always going to win you the game because that's kind of a one-time thing. And you might draw 2 lands and you're like, well, great, I already got 6 lands. I don't need those. But the things I like to look for is card advantage stapled to a permanent or stapled to a removal spell. And when I say card advantage, I don't just mean drawing cards. I also mean scrying, surveilling, bouncing, their thing, making them replay it. So there's other kinds of card advantage other than simple, basic card draw. Another form of card advantage is like cost reduction. So in Edge of Eternities, we have this cool creature that your second spell costs 2 less per turn. Reduces the cost of your spells. I can now cast more spells per turn than my opponent. I'm getting card advantage. There's also creatures that create a token or things that create a token with them. So in Avatar, you had Lost Days, was a blue removal spell, and it was one of the highest performing blue commons in the set because not only was it a removal spell, but it came with a clue token. And getting that clue token, you could crack it to draw a card, or you could sacrifice it for any other synergies in your deck. You could tap it for waterbending. So the fact that I'm able to interact with your board, maybe blow out a combat, or blow out a double block, or remove a creature when you're trying to do a fight spell or something. And I'm also replacing my card with more cards. I get that clue token. I'm getting something back. There's some, like Donatello. There's one of the Donatellos, I think it's a common in this set of turtles, which is when it enters, if you control an artifact, you draw a card. So having a creature that draws you a card is great because let's just say they've got a removal spell in hand. They're waiting for it. You drop Donatello, you draw a card, they use their removal spell. Well, you're up a card now. They've used their spell as a 1-for-1 trade, and I've drawn a card. And even if it's land, well, now that land's no longer on the top of your deck. So next turn you have a higher chance of drawing some gas, right? One of the best white commons in the turtle set is April O'Neil. 2/2 creature for 2 mana. When it enters, you scry 2. Great. Perfect. That is a wonderful 2-drop. There was also a really good one in Aether Drift, the Wicker Folk, which was a 2 mana, 1/3 flying artifact creature. When it enters, you surveil 2. So on turn 2, you can, hey, if I kept a 2-land hand, I need some lands. So if I surveil 2, I can put that land on the top, or if they're both like 5-drop creatures, I can throw those into the graveyard, and now I'm higher chance of drawing the land I need. Or if I've kept a 4-land hand, I don't want land, I cast my 2-drop, I can get rid of both of those lands. That is a huge advantage. Those kind of things are great in the late game too. One of the best like white commons in Dragonstorm Tarkir was the Mardu Devotee, 1 mana, scry 2 when it enters. So you can sculpt that hand, and the important thing is, usually late in the game, it really sucks if you top deck Let's say it's a kind of a board stall. You top deck a 1-drop or a 2-drop. That sucks because they might top deck their 7-mana bomb, and you're like, well, I drew my 1-drop, useless. Well, if there's card advantage built to that with that Scry or Surveil, that's actually extremely helpful. One of the bad things that can happen late in a game of Limited is you start, you're out of cards. Let's say you're just out of cards, your opponent's out of cards. You're now in a top deck battle of who can draw the best card, and you draw 3 lands in a row, and the game's over. You lose, right? But you draw Mardu Devotee, you can scry 2, get rid of both those lands, and now you're drawing gas, and your opponent is drawing lands. They get flooded. You win the game, right? So those are the reason those kind of low mana value creatures are really good is because they have card advantage built into them. You're able to sculpt your hand for what you need. Beginning of the game, middle of the game, end of the game. They have relevance through the entire game, through the entire match because they have card advantage in terms of scrying, surveilling, drawing an extra card, etc. So that's point number 1. You'll win more games if you can out-card your opponent. Have you ever played against somebody that has like every removal spell, and every time you cast a creature, they just remove it, and you're like, dude, can I keep a creature, please? Well, if your creatures all are drawing you cards or scrying and surveilling, you're going to win that game because they're doing 1-for-1 removal, but you're playing creatures with card advantage on them. So those are great. Keep an eye out for those. Those are really powerful. Point number 2 I want to make is aggression wins games. There's typically 2 ways that a game of Magic ends. The most common is one person goes to 0 life. You kill your opponent, they kill you. That's the way you finish 90+% of your games in Limited. Every now and then you might have a huge board stall and somebody's drawing a ton of cards and they run out of cards, their library's empty, and you finally just like, well, I survived. They ran out of cards first, but that's rare. That happens, maybe once or twice every 100 games that I've played that somebody runs out of cards. That's pretty rare. The vast majority of the time, somebody runs out of life and they're dead and the game's over and you win or you lose. And so aggression, attacking, taking their life points down is going to win games. That's why having a lower mana curve is really critical. If you can have a couple powerful 1-drops or even just playable 1-drops, 6, 7, 2-drops, and then 5 or 6 3-drops, and then you kind of limit your curve to anything over 4 mana. You only have a couple of those in your deck, maybe 2, 3, 4-drops, 2 5-drops, and 1 card that's over 6 mana, and it has to be a very good card to want to be in your deck for 6+ mana. I'll give you an example of why aggression wins games. I was playing one. I posted the video. It's my Dawn and Leo Is It Artifacts deck I posted a few days ago. And there was one of the games I was playing against. I think it was a Simic deck or a Sultai deck, something in that range. And I had some flying creatures. They start playing some big boys. They start playing 4/4s, 5/5s. And I've got a 3/3 flyer and a 2/2 flyer. And every turn I just kept attacking with my flyers. I knew I was going to take more damage because I'm not leaving them up as a blocker, but the only way I'm going to win that game is by getting them dead before they get me dead. I'm not going to be able to hold back my small creatures, and if I start blocking with those flyers, they're just going to die, and they're still going to have these big creatures. I'm going to have to double block, lose both of my creatures to trade for one of theirs, and now they're probably still going to have more big boys in their deck that I can't really deal with. The advantage is I had a lot of interactions. So red and blue both typically have a lot of removal, a lot of bounce spell type stuff. So I was like, I need to attack with my flyers because they're not good blockers, do as much damage as I possibly can, and then hope I just draw some good interaction here, which I had lots in my deck, so there was a good chance of that happening. And that's basically exactly how the game played out. They kept playing big creatures. I kept swinging with my flyers. I drew a couple more flyers. I drew some interaction. I was able to get rid of a couple of their big boys. And they ended up conceding because I was swinging for 7 damage in the air the next turn. They were at 7 life. And I had the sewer surveillance cam thing where I kept tapping down their big creature, and they couldn't do enough damage to outrace me. So I won that game because I realized the only way I'm winning is just keep swinging and try to hopefully race them and interact with their creatures. I was playing another game in another draft I posted, and my opponent wasn't attacking when they should have been. They had a wider board than me, they had some big creatures, and they could have easily just swung all multiple turns, and I would have been forced into some blocks. I would have been able to kill a few of their creatures, but one big attack from them would have wiped out my entire board. I would have had to block with all of my... I just had some small creatures. I was off to kind of one of those starts where I drew a lot of 2-drops that game, and I wasn't drawing my higher curve stuff, and they were drawing 3-drop, 4-drop, 4-drop, 3-drop. And so one big swing, they would have forced me to block with everything. I would have had no board left the next turn. They could have easily just ran me over. But they were afraid of losing like one of their key creatures. Obviously, I would have like double blocked their key creature. And turn after turn, they just were not attacking. And that gave me the time to draw some bigger cards, some more impactful cards, some of my rares. Eventually, I came back and won that game. And the only reason I won that game is because they were too afraid of losing one of their key creatures when their best... all they had to do is just start clicking attack all every turn. If they just was like, every turn, no matter what, I'm just attack all, don't care if I lose a creature or two. They had way more creatures than me. They had bigger creatures than me. They weren't aggressive. Another example of that same exact thing happened. I was playing a game at my game store of Avatar, and my opponent had the Otter Penguin, which, if you're not familiar, is a goofy little creature. It's like a 2-drop 2/1, and so that already tells you it's meant to attack. It has 1 toughness. It's not a good blocker. But when you draw your second card during your turn, or during any turn, it gets +1/+2 and becomes a 3/3 unblockable. And so that card is great in something like a Dimir deck, where you're going to have a ton of clue tokens. You're drawing the cards, and that's what my opponent was playing. They were playing Dimir. And the boards were fairly even. I got off to a good start. They got off to a good start. But there was like 3 turns where they drew 2 cards, and then they didn't attack with the Otter Penguin. And I even told my opponent, why aren't you attacking? I mean, I'd attack with that. And they're like, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I want to block with it. And I'm thinking, but it's a terrible blocker. It's a 2/1. You can't block hardly anything with this thing. And if they had just attacked, that game ended up going long. And they got me down to 1 life, and then I was able to kill them because it was just a long back and forth battle. And eventually I had to use a removal spell on that Otter Penguin, because I knew eventually I'm getting low on life. That thing will kill me if I don't destroy it. Their lack of aggression lost them the game. Once again, I was at 1 life by the time that game ended. And they missed 3 different attacks with that unblockable Otter Penguin for 3. So they easily would have won that game. The game never would have went into the long territory if they had just kept attacking every time they had a good attack. Some people won't attack if the opponent has like 4 or 5 cards in hand, because they're like, gee, maybe they have a combat trick, or maybe they have a removal spell and I'll get blown out. Yeah, that may be very true. And it is important, like, especially if let's say you're playing best of 3, you know your opponent's deck, you've seen these combat tricks, maybe they have it, maybe they don't. My theory is more like, if you have a good attack every single time. If you look at their board and you're like, okay, I've got 3 4/4s and they got 3 3/3s, attack every time. Attack with everything. Attack with everything you possibly can. The only time I don't attack is if, let's say they've got a 2/4 blocker and I've got a 2/2. I don't want them just eating my creature for free, so I won't attack with that 2/2 if they've got a really good block for that one creature. Unless they're low on life, in which case I'm like, sure, swing. You want to eat my 2/2, but then you don't block my 4/4 and you take 4? I'm giving up a 2/2, but you're at 7 life. So yeah, I'm taking that trade, So my thing is, err on the side of overly aggressive. Don't be suicidally aggressive. Don't be stupid. Don't just, throw your creatures away. Those are resources. But especially if I'm thinking I'm not going to block with this creature. Like, for example, like I talked about before, if I have a 2/2 flyer and they have a 3/3 ground creature, I'm not blocking with that creature next turn. So attack. No reason not to attack. When in doubt, attack. Kill. Go for the throat, be aggressive. Make them sweat. Put the pressure on. their deck might be better than yours. They may have bombs you don't know about. They may have a 6-mana board wipe that you don't know about. And if you're not attacking early and getting their life pressure down, if you're not putting the pressure on, I'll give you another example of why aggression is important. Let's say your opponent has a lot of removal, and you drop a 1-drop, and then you drop a 2-drop, and then you drop a 3-drop. You're curving out, and these are just like common, junky little creatures, nothing special. These aren't your big rares or anything crazy. These are just commons. Well, now they're under a lot of pressure for their life total, and they're going to have to start burning removal spells. How many times have you had like a 4-mana removal spell that you had to use on a 2-drop or a 3-drop because your opponent is curving out, and they're going to beat you down, and now you're blowing your entire turn and a quality premium removal spell because you have to protect your life total, and you don't have a creature that turn, you don't have a good blocker, so you're like, well, shit, I gotta use this premium removal spell on a 2-drop or a 3-drop just to, so I don't get completely ran over here, right? So aggression can win you games, and if you get off to a really early aggressive start, you can beat better decks because they got off to a slow start, and then later in the game when they're dropping these huge bombs and stuff and these awesome creatures that you can't really compete with, but they're at 2 life and you've got 5 attackers and they got 3 blockers, guess what? You won, because you were aggressive and you just wore their life total down before they could stabilize and before they could, get their activate their game plan, activate their synergies, activate their card advantage, right, from point 1. Okay, so aggression wins game. Card advantage wins games, aggression wins games. Point 3, this one's a little bit more complicated. It takes a little bit more knowledge of the particular set that you're playing. And that's evaluating cards when you're in the draft portion, when you're looking at your packs and figuring out what card to pick. And that's comparing individual card quality with the synergies of your deck. And so if you're a beginner drafter, it's a little harder. You don't really, maybe you're not used to having to create a deck on the fly. But creating synergies within your deck is really strong. So, for example, if you're doing in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if you're doing a black-white sneak deck, which is one of the most powerful decks in the format right now, knowing how many attacker, sneak, enabler type creatures do I need, and those are going to be your low mana curve creatures. I'll give you an example. One of the best uncommons in the entire set is Dream Beavers. If not, it might even be the best uncommon in the set. It's a 1-mana flying 1/1 that scries when it enters and drains your opponent for 1. So insanely strong for a 1-drop. And that's the kind of creature where, for example, let's say you're on the play, you play a turn 1 Dream Beavers, your opponent plays a tap land and passes, and now you've got a free attack, and then on turn 2 you can sneak something in if you have a 2-mana sneak spell, right? And you're super ahead of the game at that point. So that's a sneak enabler. Another example would be the 1/1 Death Touch Squirrel. It's like Squirrelinoise. I think it's a common. It's just a 1/1 Death Touch. Same thing. You get that, and you attack with it, and let's say the only creature your opponent has is like a 3/3 creature. They do not want to block a 1/1 Death Touch because they're going to lose their 3/3 that they paid 3 or 4 mana for, and you got a 1/1. So they're going to let that through. Boom. I had that happen in my pre-release tournament. I had Madam Null on the battlefield, which is a 1/3 Death Touch. Whenever another creature enters, you may pay life equal to its power, and you put that many 1/1 counters on it. So you double the power of a creature when it enters if you have some life to spend. And usually with the sneak deck, you're the attacker. You are the aggressor. And so you typically, it's not that hard to spend life to make a bigger creature because you're attacking them. They're not attacking you. They're trying to stop your sneak, so they're trying to block. Well, I had the 1/1 Death Touch Squirrelinoids. So on turn 3, I play Madam Null. Turn 4, I attack with the Squirrelinoids. They didn't want to block. It's 1/1 Death Touch. They're like, yeah, I'll just take the 1. They were at 17 life. Well, I paid 4 mana to sneak in the Shredder. I think it's either a common or uncommon Shredder, but it's a 6/4 Death Touch. The sneak cost is 4. I then pay 6 life, because I was at 20, for Madam Null, and now Shredder is now a 12 power unblocked attacker. They took 12 out of nowhere because they didn't want to block a 1/1, And yeah, they went down to 5. I killed them the next turn because now I got a bunch of, so it was awesome, you know. But anyway, so for the sneak deck, you have to know how many sneak enablers do I need, how many cards that say sneak on them to have the sneak ability that I can pull that sneak enabler back and sneak it in. So those are synergy questions, right? How does my deck gonna function once I put it together to where I have enough sneak enablers and enough sneak cards? Because if you have too many sneak cards, but you don't have good attackers and you have too high of a curve, by the time you get those, 4 mana to sneak that guy in, they've already got blockers, and they're just going to block your creature, and you're like, well, I can't pay that sneak cost, so now I'm having to pay the full 6 mana casting cost for that creature. It's not as good. Or if you have a ton of low curve sneak enablers, but you didn't take enough sneak cards to actually get value, well, eventually they're just going to have bigger creatures than you, and you're not going to win that game probably, because you're just drawing a bunch of 1-drops and 2-drops, and they're like, all right, I got a 4/4, I got a 5/5, I got a bunch of 3/3s, good luck, game's up, I'm going to run, now it's my turn to beat you up. So that's a synergy. That's an example of synergy. Similarly, like if you're doing the red-blue artifacts deck in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you want to be taking artifact cards highly because you have a ton of cards that trigger when an artifact enters, or based on how many artifacts you have, or I get to draw a card when this creature enters if I control an artifact. There's a really good flyer, one of the uncommon Donatellos is like a 1/2 flyer, but it gets 1+1/+1 counter every time an artifact enters. That thing can be like 6 power within 2 turns. It's crazy if you have enough artifacts. So the synergies is you want to take artifact cards highly for that deck. You need artifacts. So now let's talk about the card quality, the individual card quality. And here's how I kind of picture evaluating a card based on its, what you might call just its raw power or its individual card quality. The way I picture that is, let's say you're playing that card on a completely empty board state. So let's say the game has gone long, you've killed their creatures, they've killed your creatures, you have nothing. You have nothing but lands on your battlefield. And you draw that your hand is empty, the opponent's hand is empty, there's nothing, the game is stalled out, the board is empty, they have no creatures, you have no creatures, they have no cards in hand, you have no cards in hand. You top deck that. How strong is that card if you play it, right? So, if I play, let's go back to Edge of Eternities, and I top deck the End Stone, which is a 7-mana artifact that says anytime you play a land or cast a spell, you draw a card. So you play that, you play a land, you draw a card. Then you cast that spell, you draw another card, right? It's just like game over, right? That is an insanely powerful card. All you have to do is draw your next card and play it, and boom, you're probably going to win that game because it just sets off this huge chain reaction of massive card advantage that, unless the opponent has you down to like no life, it's like you're going to win that game because you're just going to, boom, I played a land, boom, I draw a card, boom, I play a creature, boom, I draw another card and play that. It's just game over. That's an insanely powerful card on a completely empty board state. You need almost nothing for that card to just take the game over. One of basically the top rare in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle set right now is Sally Pride. I think it's 5 mana for like a 3/3 creature. When it enters, you create a 2/2 token for every non-token creature you control. So obviously that card has the synergy of like the more creatures you have, the more powerful that is. But just by itself, let's say you play that on an empty board. You play it, you have a 3/3. So you have 1 non-token creature. You then make a 2/2, right? Even if they remove that, their next card is a removal spell and they kill your Sally Pride, you have a 2/2 that you can start beating them up with. So powerful card. But also when you attack with Sally Pride, you put a 1/1 counter on every creature you control. So if you can untap with that, they top deck a creature or something and you attack with Sally Pride, well now that's a 4/4 and now you got a 3/3. So it gets out of control really quickly. Something like a Planeswalker, like an Ugin or an Elspeth from Tarkir Dragonstorm. If you top deck that, you play it, you're probably winning that game if they can't get rid of it immediately, right? That's a super strong card on its own. You need nothing to make that card powerful, very powerful. So let's compare that with like a synergy piece. Let's compare that with Donatello, like I mentioned earlier, that when it enters, you draw a card if you control an artifact. Well, if you draw that and you have no artifacts, a big part of the value of that card's gone. You don't have the synergy. So that card is a lot weaker, right? So how to evaluate individual card quality? Like, I play this card, no matter what's happening on the board, this is a strong card, versus your synergy pieces where they need to interact with other things. I'll give you an example of how synergy can be kind of a negative in some way. So in Lorwyn, the set that we just kind of got done with, the Goblins deck was considered the worst or the hardest to pull off of the 5 major creature types in that set. And one of the reasons was the Goblins required you to, a lot of their synergies with Blight, meaning you would have to put -1 counters on creatures you control in order to get some kind of value. And so, for example, there was like a creature that was like, when it enters, you can Blight 2, meaning put 2 -1 counters on a creature you control. And if you do, you get 2 1/1 goblins. Okay, so to activate that card's value, you have to Blight your own creature, which might kill your creature if it's a 1/1 or a 2/2. Or if you have a 4/4, now it's a 2/2. That's not good. Yeah, that's not good, right? Another part of the Goblins deck was a lot of their stuff triggered when one of your creatures dies. So there was like multiple cards that was like, if one of your creatures dies, you gain a life, your opponent loses a life, or your opponent loses a life when one of your creatures dies. So over the game of Magic, yeah, creatures are going to die. It's going to be combat. It's going to be, your opponent's going to remove stuff, whatever. But in order to get value out of your card that you just played, one of your other cards has to die. You have to have a resource. You have to lose resources. So both of those, Blight and your creature dying, is you're losing resources in order to get value. That's kind of backwards, right? And so there were good Goblin decks where that all kind of came together, where you had things you could do to like remove those Blight counters and get value off the Blight counters, so they were like a temporary bad thing. You could get like your Boggart Mischiefs and stuff like that, to where eventually you had enough Goblins to where it was extremely hard for your opponent to win, because they attack in, you block with a bunch of Goblins, they lose a bunch of life, and you burn them out. Another example is, I think Edge of Eternities had in black, there was a lot of stuff about like sacrificing your own stuff, and you might drain your opponent for 1 or something if you sacrifice something, and once again that became pretty negative, because it's like, how often do you want to, like, hey, I'm going to pay 3 mana for this creature, and then later I'm just going to sacrifice it to do 1 damage to my opponent. It doesn't really add up, right? So synergies that involve losing your own resources in order to get value typically are a lot harder to pull off, right? That's where synergies can be, you have to really understand the cards and the set in order to pull off a synergy like that, because there's a lot of downsides and they don't work that often. And so understanding when you're in the drafting portion, it can be complicated, because when you start drafting, you shouldn't really have a deck in mind that you want to play. I mean, maybe you have a deck that you like to play, that's fine. And if you see good cards, you're like, okay, I'm jumping into my favorite archetype, sweet. You can make a good deck, But when you start a draft, you should never go into it just thinking, hey, tonight I'm playing red-black no matter what, And then you open your first pack and you get a great white rare, and you're like, I'll pass that. I want to play red-black. And then you get like no good red-black cards, and you're just like, I'm just going to take like the worst red-black commons because I want to play red-black. That's what I want to do. And then in your next pack, you open a green rare, and you're like, I'm going to pass that. I want to play red-black, And you just keep taking garbage common red-black cards, and eventually you will get a red-black deck out of that. You're probably going to lose every game because you passed all your rares, and you didn't jump into an open lane. You just forced red-black and took a bunch of crappy commons and maybe a couple good uncommons, Your deck's going to suck, So you should go into the draft with an open mind of like, let's see what rares I open. Let's see what the open lane is, Let's find our path through the draft. That's how you get your strongest and best decks. And so it's difficult planning your synergies. You have to start seeing what's coming to you, what's that open lane. Then maybe identify, so like turtle specifically, let's say you're getting in, you opened a blue-green or green or blue rares, and you're getting past like some green and blue signpost on commons. You're like, okay, this is the open lane, I'm jumping into it. Then you need to start being like, okay, green and blue in this set is big stompy creatures and mutagen tokens. I want anything that says mutagen token, I need to grab. That's my synergy. That's what my archetype's trying to do, And so you're going to start grabbing big stompy creatures. You're going to start grabbing card draw stuff. You're going to start grabbing mana ramp like the Frog Butlers, and you're going to start grabbing Tenderize. You know what that archetype wants you to do, and so you're going to prioritize those. And then let's say you're going down that path, and then pack 3 you get this great white rare, like let's say it's the Triceraton Commander. This happened to me in a draft on Arena. My pack 3 was Triceraton Commander, an Insane Bomb, awesome card, but it's also 2 white pips. I have no white in my deck. I passed it because I was like, you know what? It doesn't fit with my deck. It doesn't fit with the synergies of my deck. It's an insanely powerful card. But now I have to, in pack 3, try to figure out some mana fixing and whether I can splash it or not. The chances, that I'm going to play it are probably pretty low. So I'd rather just take a card that's good for the synergies of my deck. And so that's a perfect example of individual card power versus synergy. Conversely, let's say I'm just taking green and blue cards, pack 1 and 2. Pack 3, I open a really good green and black rare, like the Last Ronin, like one of the best mythics in the set, right? Oh, I'm taking that. I'm splashing that. Like, it's easy for me to come up with one black pip, right? There's a lot of crossovers between the synergies of the green-black archetype and the blue-green archetype. So knowing, hey, this is a powerful card, but is it worth splashing? Is it worth stretching my mana base for this? And how powerful is the card? Is the card powerful enough for me to want to splash it? And then also, does it fit with my synergies? And if I'm drafting green-blue and I take a green-black, that's pretty easy to splash. That's not difficult to get 1 black pip. Whereas 2 white pips is difficult, right? That stretches your mana base and you're fixing way more than adding 1 black pip. Is the card powerful enough? Absolutely. That's a bomb. That's a huge bomb. Super powerful card. That can win you games that you were down to 1 life and they had 12 creatures and you had 1 creature, and then boom, Last Ronin, you wiped them out. You might win that game now. Super powerful card. And so evaluating, but what I was going to say is, the green-black has a lot of synergy crossovers with green-blue. So if I take Last Ronin, and then there's some more really good green-black cards that come up in pack 3, I can now take those too. That's a reason for me to get into that, and there's a lot of crossover. Those cards the synergies work well together. So that's point number 3. Just a quick review. Card advantage wins games, aggression wins games, and then as you're navigating the draft, understanding the difference between extremely powerful cards that are just standalone great cards, and you want to draft those highly if you can, but also understand building a deck that has internal synergies where your cards all complement each other and they are working towards that same goal. And like, for example, like if you cast an artifact and it triggers multiple different things, like, well, now I get a draw a card off this card, and now I get a 1/1 counter on that card, and now I can sacrifice that artifact to this other card, or this other card that gets +1/+0 for every artifact I have, So you cast a card and it triggers like 4 other synergies. Yeah, you're probably winning that game, or at least you're doing very well. And so, well, that's going to wrap it up for today. This video ended up being a lot longer than I thought. I could talk about Magic all day, but if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please like and subscribe. Really appreciate it. It's a small channel. Every like and subscribe helps us out. And I just want to say, good luck on your next draft. Take care.